Hey everybody, today I have for you a review of Rage of Elements for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Before we get started, I should let you know that I was provided a copy of this book by Paizo. Rage of Elements is 242 pages from cover to cover and has a retail price of $54.99. This length and price point put it in the same category as other recently released rulebooks such as the Treasure Vault and Dark Archive. The PDF version may also be purchased online for $19.99, which is worth noting as Paizo heavily discounts their rulebooks versus setting books in the Lost Omens line, which typically cost $30 for the PDF. Rage of Elements is Pathfinder 2nd Edition's guide to all things elemental. It's divided into 8 chapters, the first of which deals with elemental characters. This begins with a discussion of what elements are, a history of the elemental planes, and some general advice for mortals wanting to explore these distant realms. The chapter continues to introduce a new character class, the Kineticist. Kineticists are sort of like benders from Avatar: The Last Airbender, but with less emphasis on martial arts. They are living gateways to the elemental planes, and at first level they can choose to access one or two of the 6 elements, which are air, earth, fire, metal, water, and wood. All kineticists begin play with 2 impulse feats, which describe how they can manipulate the elements. Dual gate kineticists, being those who choose to access 2 of the elements, must choose 1 impulse feat from each of those 2 elements, and single gate kineticists get 2 impulse feats from the same element and also gain what is called an impulse junction. For example, a single gate kineticist who specializes in fire can increase the size of fire damage dice by 1 step when using a fire impulse that costs 2 or more actions. Kineticists may also use the channel elements action that allows them to draw matter from the planes they're connected to. This creates a kinetic aura around them that allows them to use their impulses. Impulses are essentially the kineticist version of spells, which may be repeated unless otherwise noted, or until an overflow impulse is used, which ends the kinetic aura. Also, while kinetic aura is active, kineticists may freely use elemental blasts, which are basic ranged attacks with differing damage types and range increments depending on the element that is used. This may be done with 1 or 2 actions, the difference being that the 2 action version gets a damage bonus equal to their constitution modifier added to the attack. Let's take a look at a few of the impulse feats which can only be used while the kineticist's kinetic aura is active. Aerial Boomerang is an air impulse that lets the user make a 60-foot line attack on one turn, and then a second line attack at the end of their next turn when the boomerang returns back to them. Stepping Stones allows an Earth Kineticist to create a bridge for them and their allies. Burning Jet lets a Fire Kineticist blast their way past enemies or over difficult terrain. Metal Carapace lets a Metal Kineticist surround themselves in armor and raise a shield. Deflecting Wave lets water kineticists use their reaction to deflect some of the damage caused by acid, bludgeoning, fire, or slashing attacks. And Fresh Produce lets a wood kineticist heal themselves and their allies. So the basic rotation for a kineticist at first level is use channel elements to activate their kinetic aura, then attack with their elemental blasts and cast impulses until they use an overflow impulse, which ends the kinetic aura until they start it again with channel elements and repeat. As a kineticist levels up, they gain greater control over their chosen elements and discover new ways to use them. For the purposes of this video though, I'm going to stop there, and that should give you a decent understanding of what a kineticist is and how they work. Next, Rage of Elements provides new elemental eidolon options for summoners and new elemental companion options that are intended as animal companion options for druids who have both the animal order and a corresponding elemental order. For example, a druid who belongs to both the Animal Order and Storm Order might have an air elemental Zephyrhawk as their animal companion. However, it is worth noting that Raw states that the character only needs to have the corresponding elemental order in most cases. Metal elemental companions are a bit of an exception, since there are no druid elemental orders corresponding to metal right now. There are no stated prerequisites for having a metal elemental companion as there are with the other elemental companions. And of course, the book also offers new options for elemental familiars as well. 5 new elemental familiar types are provided, including mood clouds, chrismal shardlings, elemental wisps, Janaeans, which are minor elemental genies, and elemental scamps. More player options are provided in the form of 10 new backgrounds, 6 of which are common rarity, 2 are uncommon, and it also includes 2 rare backgrounds, elementally infused and planar migrant. After that, we get 2 new ancestries, Ardande Jinnikin and Talos Jinnikin. These options basically round out the other Jinnykins already in the game by adding wood and metal elemental versions. Next, the Barbarians get some love with a new elemental Barbarian instinct, including an elemental rage. The book goes on to update the Elementalist archetype and elemental spells from the Secrets of Magic book to include the new metal and wood elements, and I believe for simplicity, the entire Elementalist archetype is presented here in Rage of Elements with those changes included. The next 6 chapters each deal with a separate element. Since all of those chapters follow the same format, which you've already seen if you viewed my preview on the Fire chapter, I'm not going to cover them individually, but instead I'm going to sum them all up together. Each chapter begins with an overview of the element and its plane written from the perspective of an in-universe character, like an elemental resident of that plane or a professional tour guide. This is followed by about 5 pages detailing that elemental plane's geography and its residents, as well as providing adjustments for making elemental versions of previously published creatures. Each chapter then offers a pair of new elemental deities, typically one of which is holy and the other is unholy, and a handful of new elemental spells and items. And each of these chapters end with a selection of elemental-themed monsters and other creatures to expand your bestiary. Let's take a look at a few examples of each of these across the different elements, and first let's look at a couple locations. Port Eclipse is a hidden enclave within the elemental plane of air used by pirates and sky captains to operate beyond the watchful eye of the Jathum Empire. And City on Lore is built upon the back of a gigantic anglerfish within the elemental plane of water. Next, a couple of deities to sample. Shumunue, the Lord of Wood, is a holy deity that presides over wood, camouflage, carpentry, life, and mimicry, and Ashura, Lord of Air, is an unholy goddess who rules over last breaths and windstorms. Next, let's look at a brief selection of new spells from the book. Glass Form is an earth spell that grants concealment, immunity to bleed, and resistance to acid, cold, electricity, and piercing damage, but also applies weakness to sonic and bludgeoning damage. Field of Razors creates a tangled mess of barbed wire that applies difficult terrain and damage to any creature that moves through it. Brine Dragon Bile is a water elemental spell that allows the caster to spend their reaction to spit caustic salt water into an enemy's open wound to deal persistent acid damage. Life Draining Roots is a wood elemental spell that damages all creatures within a 30-foot line and grants temporary hit points to the caster for each enemy hit. And Deep Breath is an air elemental cantrip that allows the caster to hold their breath for extended periods. Now next, let's look at a few of the new items included in the book. The Atmospheric Staff bolsters a spellcaster's air elemental spells. 3 new types of Aeon Stones are provided in the Earth Elemental chapter. The Metal chapter gives us the Malleable rune, which allows metal armor to reconfigure itself so that it adopts another group's armor specialization. The Conch of Otherworldly Seas grants its user passage to the elemental plane of water, as well as means to communicate with its inhabitants. And the Splintering Spear is a +2 Duskwood Greater Striking Spear that has the added benefit of spraying deadly splinters in either a cone or emanation once per day. Moving on from the new items, let's look at a couple new creatures. Each chapter provides new elementals and genie options for the 6 elements, as well as a few other creatures of note for each element, like Asps of Grief, and several new troops like the Avalanche Legion. And the final chapter of the book is titled Churn of Elements, and it discusses the mixing of different elements together. This includes 4 new hybrid element spells that allow the caster to pull upon several different elements, and this is followed by new hybrid element items like the Cipher of Elemental Planes that lets one peek in on what's happening at various locations within the different elemental planes. That covers all the content in the book, so now let's move on and take a more subjective look at it and talk about what I feel are the book's pros and cons. And while I go through these pros and cons, please keep in mind that although I have read through the book, I have not been able to thoroughly play most of its content yet. With that in mind, we'll start with the pros. This book is packed with a lot of content. It truly exceeded my expectations. When I first heard about the release of this book, I expected it to include an overview of the elemental planes and new spells. The reality is the book has all that, plus elemental creatures, items, familiars, elemental companions, deities, backgrounds, ancestries, a new class, and yes, even more. There's only one area where I think the content is a little bit lacking, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Second, the book has my preferred ratio of fluff to crunch, meaning it is mostly new game rules and game mechanics, and less content about setting, histories, personalities, and the like. I find that I can usually create enough setting details to meet my needs, but it's rules and crunch that I need most, so I'm happy to get a lot of it here. And third, I love the Kineticist. At least on paper I do. I haven't seen one actually in play yet. Although some people may find it a little bit derivative, I really like how it seems inspired by benders from The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. I especially like how simple it feels, which is a complete 180 from the first edition Kineticist that had complex burn mechanics. I think the only thing about this new second edition version that feels a little iffy to me is the name. When I hear Kineticist, I think more about telekinesis than elemental bending. In first edition, Kineticists could engage in harnessing the elements like in second edition, which they labeled as aerokinesis, geokinesis, pyrokinesis, and hydrokinesis, or you could choose to wield the power of ether from the ethereal plane and use telekinesis. So in first edition, they could channel raw energy in the form of force damage in addition to strictly using elemental energies. And that's something I think I would have liked to have seen included in second edition as well. Now for my cons. First, there's not a whole lot here for strictly martial characters. There's some new gear that may interest martial players, and a few new options for elemental barbarians, but that's pretty much about it. I think this is a real missed opportunity, and the book could have included new elemental archetypes for martials. Perhaps a whirling dervish archetype for swashbucklers and swordsmen who summon the air element to create cyclones and whirl around the battlefield. or aquanauts who specialize in underwater fighting or riding waves, or applying the new element of metal to martial classes to armor them or wield special elemental weapons. Now, it's worth noting that all of those concepts I just mentioned are absolutely possible through existing combinations of archetypes, but it would have been nice to see a few specialized archetypes provided to give the martials a little bit of love in this book too. And my second con has to do with wood and metal. I'm not really sure how I feel about the two new elements, and really this may not be a con so much as I'm just undecided. Metal just sort of feels like the earth element to me, and wood represents the substance that plant life is made from. So if wood is an element, then does that mean there's a flesh elemental plane out there, since flesh is the substance that animal life is made from? Maybe I'm just old-fashioned and I'm stuck in my ways, but right now I'm just not feeling wood and metal as being their own distinct elements. So there you have it, a look at Rage of Elements that officially releases on August 3rd. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the book, and as always, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming!